everybody, and thank you again for joining us. This is the main stage, and we're doing the professional growth. I will be introducing Ms. CJ, and I apologize if I slaughtered this, Jaloof, who has been our strategic planner it has been a strategic planner to the public and private sector of organizations for more than 20 years. She will be presenting on our course today for demystifying the EQ. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it on over to CJ. Hi, CJ.
Thanks so much, Anna. Appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen and hope that it all works out beautifully. Let's see if we can make this happen. All right. So as Anna said, my name is CJ Jaloof, and I am so excited to be here today. I love this conference. I always love to connect with all of you who are doing such important work and making such a difference one day at a time. So thank you for being here. I believe that you will find this topic mystical, but also we're ready to demystify emotional EQ. Just a quick by way of introduction, I have a pretty eclectic career that spans everything from auto mechanics to hospitality to banking, a little bit of the .com, but I obviously am here with you today because I didn't make it in the .com world. I've also had my own consulting business for about 20 plus years, working with nonprofit boards of directors, working with CEOs, working with leadership teams. And this is really one of my most favorite topics because I think it's something that we all can benefit from. And it's also it's fun, just plain fun. So before we begin, I would very much like to take your bags if I could. And what do I mean by that? Well, everybody has a lot of things going on today. So I'd like you to take a moment and think about one or two issues that are just really taking up your time and mind, which would make it difficult for you to engage in today's presentation. Don't worry, I'll be happy to give them back to you. At the end of the session, you can pick up your bags on the way out, but do take a moment to allow yourself to just sort of take that deep breath and suddenly open up your mind to possibly some new things, also maybe some things that are a reaffirmation of what you already know. Well, what's in it for you? Why are you spending your afternoon with me? Here's what's in it for you. We're going to discuss the 4 components of emotional intelligence, really wrap our arms and head around what is this emotional quotient. We've heard it, we've talked about it, it was the flavor of the month for a long time. And does it really make any sense? We're also going to have the opportunity to assess our own current EQ. As important is the opportunity to recognize and define emotional hijack and recognize our triggers. But the best part of today and what's in it for you is we're going to find ways to build our EQ. And that's going to be incredibly important as we move through this reopening, this thing we're calling the new normal, as we move through the pandemic. So I've got a little bit of work for you to do. I want you to take a moment and I want you to consider 3 individuals in your life whom you consider to be exceptional leaders. And then I'd like you to list the qualities or characteristics that make them exceptional. And I'm not talking about celebrities or anything. I'm talking about people that perhaps you know directly, that they've had an influence on you. Maybe you don't know them, but you have actually seen them in action. Maybe they haven't been your direct leader. So take a moment, if you've got your handouts or a program, just jot down some of those characteristics, those qualities that made them more than a leader, made them an exceptional leader. I'll give you a few moments to do that. We'll just take another 30 seconds. Great. Now what I'd like to have you do is I'd like to be able to take a look at the types of qualities that you all came up with by sharing them via our menti.com. And I'm going to ask Anna to put this into the chat box. We're going to go to www.menti.com and we're going to use the code 2798-5601. You can do this on your computer. You can do this on your phone, but I'd love to be able to share all of your great ideas and all of the things that you've observed. So I'm going to stop sharing and go to my other screen that will pull up the Mentimeter. So we're going to build a word cloud. If you'll join us on Mentimeter, again, it's www.menti.com. That's METI.com. And use the code 2798-5601. Oh, great. I'd love to see all these words. Keep them coming. And the great thing about this word cloud is that the words that are duplicated get larger. So we can see that we have a commonality with many of the words. We'll just keep them coming. Very much appreciate your participation. These are great words. We're going to keep the polling, so to speak, open for just a little bit longer. So get your votes in now. So we've got compassionate, supportive, encouraging, transparent, caring, honest, integrity, decisive, inspire, honesty, not a micromanager, coaching, encouraging, follow through, trustworthy, tenacious, mentorship. As those keep coming, take a look at the word cloud, and there are generally three characteristics or three categories of characteristics for leaders. There's the IQ, the smarts, the brains behind it all. Then there's the technical skills, the actual hands-on. Well, and then there's emotional intelligence, EQ. As you read through that list, what do you see? Well, I see that there are more qualities found that are what we would call emotional intelligence than real skills, that technical piece, or even that smarts. So when you look at those, you have to recognize that what made them exceptional, how they connected with you, the journey from good to great, it was moving into those emotional intelligent pieces, because certainly they probably came up through the ranks, many of them. They had the smarts, they developed the skills, but for you, what made you want to consider them to be exceptional? Not their skills, not their smarts. No, it was actually their EQ. So we usually develop our IQ through mathematics or a calculus course, for instance. Um, well, how many of you use calculus now? Some of you might. I certainly don't. It was an exercise, though, to build our IQ. It's just like when we do push-ups to train for a sport. We're not going to do the actual push-ups on the field, but it's that exercise that makes us better, getting our muscles together. So what we're talking about now is what can we do to increase our EQ? So where do we really learn EQ? Well, maybe the School of Hard Knocks. Recently, science has given us information that we can now use to teach EQ. They've sort of taken the vagueness out of what it means to be emotionally intelligent, and they've actually coded it. So we can discuss the exact science of what it means to, or what it takes to be a better managing ourselves out of tough situations. So how many people in your influence, your circle of influence, would have listed you as an exceptional leader? Maybe an exceptional parent, an exceptional friend, an exceptional coach. I submit that many of you could say, yeah, I'm an exceptional friend, or I'm an exceptional leader, or I'm an exceptional peer. And that's fabulous, because that's what we want. So sometimes people say, well, are there different cultures that actually, are they naturally better in emotional intelligence? No, not really. At the end of the day, our brain always works the same way. So let's compare our findings of exceptional leaders to what researchers at Harvard found. So again, thank you for those words. Love when people participate. But let's take a look again at what it is that Harvard found out. So this is a reference, if you're interested, Daniel Goleman, Goleman, was the first person to really start talking about emotional intelligence in the late 90s. He wrote a book called Working with Emotional Intelligence. So about the research, well, researchers at Harvard took a cross-section of graduates from law, medicine, and business, and followed them for 30, that's correct, 30 years to identify indicators of success. Success was defined by personal achievement in their respective fields, as well as stability in key relationships. So recognize that these individuals certainly had enough IQ to get into Harvard and to graduate from Harvard. But the real objective of the study was to look at those who had been most successful and determine what it was about them that could have predicted their success. So here's what they found. Only 8 to 9% of IQ was a predictor of success. So yes, they were all smart, but that really didn't lend us to believe that they could then be successful. Matter of fact, some of the research indicated that at the highest levels of IQ, there was actually a negative correlation to future success. Well, technical skills contributed about the same. Only about 8 to 9% of future success could be attributed to technical skills. Well, then, what was the success key? Emotional intelligence accounted for more than twice IQ and technical skills combined in determining who would be successful. So you may ask yourself, what do most leaders in my agency typically rely on to lead. Well, the good news is that while IQ is relatively fixed, that is, research indicates that at age 16, our levels of IQ become fairly concrete. But with emotional intelligence, it can be learned and improved at any age. Well, what is emotional intelligence? Daniel Goleman considers emotional intelligence to be the ability to manage myself and my relationships with others so that I can live my intentions. Let me repeat that. Emotional intelligence is the ability to manage myself and my relationships with others so that I can live my intentions. You have a handout that has a little bit more information than what I'm going to share with you on this slide. But Daniel Goleman says there are really 4 elements of emotional intelligence. And they're really competencies, if you will. Goleman put them into 4 different categories, each building on the previous. So if we look at the first level of competency of emotional intelligence that impacts personal leadership, that's self-awareness. This is the foundation on which other EQ competencies rest. It runs through and anchors all the other competencies. Well, what is self-awareness? Self-awareness allows you to recognize what might be driving your behavior, performance, and leadership. This, in turn, will allow you to remain authentic, adaptable, flexible, and driven. So as is illustrated, the base can wobble, but its core keeps the toy standing, so to speak. So take a look at your handout and recognize that we are talking about, in that same category, emotional self-awareness, accurate self-assessment, and self-confidence. The next level is self-management. And this is about managing your own emotional state, leveraging emotion and using it to your advantage, and managing your emotions in a stressful state. Well, I certainly don't have to tell you how emotionally stressful your particular line of work is. Any and all of us in the human services arena are faced with consistent stress, trauma-informed lens. The list goes on. So that ability to self-manage becomes paramount to our own success and our own well-being. So when we look at self-management on your handout, we've got self-control, transparency, that adaptability, achievement, initiative, optimism. Well, I want to step back and give all of you kudos for the fact that we've made it through a pandemic. And if there was ever a time where we saw that adaptability, achievement, initiative, and optimism, I think you'd agree with me. It was the last 18 months or so. Well, once skilled at managing your own emotions, you can effectively begin to build social awareness using strong empathy. We all know the difference between empathy and sympathy, but let me just refresh everyone, because while we don't want people to stop saying, "I'm sorry," but recognize that when we're sympathetic, it can be almost a conversation stopper. So I might want to share something with you that has just happened to me that has upset me. And if you take the time to say, "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry about that, CJ," well, that's all good and well. I'm not going to say any more because you pretty much stopped the conversation. But if we're going to be empathetic, then that opens the door for me to share more. So you might instead say, "Gosh, I can't even imagine what you're feeling based on what you just shared with me." Now, again, I'm not suggesting that we stop saying "I'm sorry," but I am suggesting, if you've got the time, that empathetic response opens up the door for that individual to share more with you. So the ability to effectively connect at an emotional level allows you to be a better leader and to create a relationship where deeper truths can be spoken and shared. Because again, you've opened up the door by suggesting that you're willing to hear more. So when we look at the social awareness on your handout, we've got empathy, organizational awareness, and service. The last piece of the puzzle is effective relationship management. And what that means is that it rests on our ability to be self-aware, to effectively manage our emotions, to skillfully handle the emotions of others, and to emotionally connect with people around us. So this is where great performance occurs and personal leadership evolves. This is about taking accountability for how emotions affect your performance and those around you. It's about putting the tools into practice. Well, what about emotions? Ugh, sort of a topic that most of us want to stay away from, but we can't. So let's look at the power of emotions. Emotions drive behavior. Well, why does this matter? Because if you have an employee with a behavioral issue and you don't deal with the emotions driving the behavior, you'll be at risk. The only way to contain the behavior is through external forces, discipline, incentives, etc. And as soon as the external force is removed, then the old behavior tends to return. So think about people in sales. When are they likely to make their next sale? Well, most of us agree after the last one, because it's that momentum. So if you want to impact behavior, performance, or leadership, and you're addressing the emotions that drive them, you'll be focusing your energies on symptoms instead of causes. And as a result, be less effective in your efforts. So to fully understand these three premises, we need to know that we're not saying emotions drive behavior and behavior drives performance, but it's actually a direct correlation from emotions to all three. So here's an example. Groups of inner city high-risk youth were taught EQ, emotional intelligence, in New York, Chicago, and New Jersey. Their GPA went up by 30% when they learned to deal more effectively with their environment. EQ directly impacted their performance. Well, we know that external motivators, money, parking spaces, Starbucks cards, have a shelf life of about 3 months. After that, we're back to managing the internal or emotional motivators to drive performance and leadership. So many of us would agree that for the moment, money can be an amazing motivator. We can get so excited about that raise, but think about it. Isn't it sort of true that maybe 3 months after that raise, it just seems suddenly again like they just can't pay you enough to do the job? I'm not sure if it's ever happened to you, but I can certainly remember times when I thought, wow, yay. But it's still not enough. And so we do have to think about those kinds of situations. Well, think about the Olympics. Apparently, they're going to go ahead in Tokyo this time around. Think about all of those Olympians who train their bodies to consistently perform, to reach the exact same level of high performance every race or dive or game by repetition over and over and over again. When they're there, though, there are more personal bests set than any other event. There are actually more personal worsts set there as well. When the game is tough, it's about what you've trained your body to do. It's not about that. It's emotional. So think about the fact that you are trained and trained and trained, but the emotional impact of being at the Olympics And we've seen recently some fabulous athletes who have, from an emotional standpoint, the tennis players that are not going to Wimbledon because of the media and the emotion and all of that. So begin to think about the fact that hopefully we're going to learn some skills today that will allow us to play big and connect with people. Okay, we've talked about emotions, but if we're not that kind of touchy-feely kind of person, then isn't there some place for the brain to come in? Well, fortunately, there is. But take a moment to look at this quote. It's very important to understand that emotional intelligence is not the opposite of intelligence. It is not the triumph of heart over head. It's the unique intersection of both. I wanted to take that moment to share that quote because it is very easy, just from the first few minutes of our conversation, to get caught up into thinking about the fact that it's all about emotions and has nothing to do with the head, heart over head. But it is that unique intersection of both the heart and head that's important. So let's move on to the brain. Well, you've got the first part of the brain to develop was the brainstem. It's responsible for the basic functions like temperature, breathing, heart rate, and reflexes. Then we have the amygdala, which is really, just for a moment, I want you to think about a shelled almond. Amygdala is actually Greek, the Greek word for almond. And so again, think about how tiny that is, a little shelled almond. So it developed next after the brainstem. And it's what we're going to look at a little bit deeper, because actually this is the site of our emotional memory. It allowed us to learn for the first time. It answers one critical question on human survival. Do I eat it, or does it eat me? Better known as the fight or flight response. All information coming into the brain passes through the amygdala first. It filters our actions in situations where we feel threatened. The filter is always on and looks for one answer to a perceived threat, fight or flight. It serves as our triage center. So the fight or flight response refers to the body's fundamental response to stress. When the brain detects a perceived threat, it prepares itself to either fight that threat or to run or flee from it. In preparation for either of the responses, fight or flight, the nervous system causes numerous bodily changes, such as an increase in blood volume, blood pressure goes up, increased blood glucose, and a release of a hormone called cortisol to help protect us from harm. The last piece of the brain to develop was the neocortex. That's where our IQ resides. It's the site of our working memory, allows us to manage complex thoughts. So every piece of information is first filtered through the amygdala, that tiny little almond. If it's not a threat, then the information goes to the neocortex for processing. However, if a threat is perceived and we have a fight or flight response, the information, then blood is actually sent from our brain either to our limbs for the flight to run away, or our internal organs to protect them and fight. Now, what that means is that less blood to the neocortex inhibits our ability to think clearly and use our full mind capacity. But, sit back and reflect. If we are in danger, that's what we want. We don't want to do a whole lot of analysis. We want to just react, get out of the situation. But let's take a look at that emotional memory. So let's go back to cave times. You're in a Neanderthal. I can't even say that today. Neanderthal. And you're with a Neanderthal friend Walking on the savannah, you hear a rustle in the bushes. A saber-toothed tiger jumps out and eats your friend. What do? Of course, you run to the nearest tree. It's your flight response. The next day, you're walking through the field again and hear a rustle in the bushes. What do? Well, regardless of what actually occurred this time and caused that rustle, you run to the tree. Your brain formed a neural pathway and an emotional memory. Rustle equals run to tree. That was your amygdala responding. True story, a child of a friend of mine was playing in the woods, walking along a path. He stepped on a snake. The snake jumped up and attempted to bite him. He jerked his leg, of course. Well, 20 years later, this individual was walking through a large conference at a hotel and stepped on an electrical cord that had been strung across the floor. What did he do? He jerked his leg. Now, he could see that it wasn't a snake, but his emotional memory said, looks like it could be. Those emotional memories stay with us. The amygdala reacts to threats, but doesn't have the capability to know the difference between perception and reality. Let me share another fact about the amygdala. It actually is a pretty much black or white thinker, an all or nothing. It can't do the gradations and can't do the ambiguity of the gray areas. So it's either good or bad, safe or dangerous. So no opportunity for it to make any sense of the real world. So when emotions take over, well, the neocortex can't function properly. And that's called an emotional hijack. The amygdala decides whether we should react to the information based on past experiences stored in our emotional memory and send it to the thinking part of our brain, the neurocortex, for further processing. So where does the emotional hijack take place and where are most of us most vulnerable? It's right here at the amygdala. Emotional hijacking occurs when emotions override intentions. I'm not sure if any of you are beginning to sort of squirm in your seat, but I am, because the other piece of the puzzle that I'm going to share with you that makes me squirm is that what the amygdala decides, if possible, when it begins to flood the thinking brain with cortisol, it can take from 10 minutes to 1 week for that action to stop. Well, why 10 minutes to 1 week? Here's the difficulty. If we continue to think about the issue at hand, the danger that we perceive, then we just keep getting wrapped around the axle. And then the amygdala has to be sort of the amygdala on steroids. It has to wildly pump out those cortisols to make the thinking brain obsolete for a moment. So can you imagine? I mean, some of us have been sort of, dumb, a little stupid every now and then, but for a whole week, yikes, that's sort of an issue. Well, it's not that emotional hijacks are something like freaking out. No, it really is about, and it's not about people being overly or outwardly emotional. There are degrees of hijack that are much more subtle, but have a significant impact on us and our teams. So think about it. When we are calm, we can actually hold 4 variables in our mind simultaneously. So this allows us to experience complex thought. The possible combinations when there are 4 variables are 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, which equals 24. So in a moment when we can hold on to 4 variables, we have 24 available options or possible solutions to a problem, which really gives us perspective and so many options for success. Well, when the amygdala starts to begin that hijack piece, then we move from the ability to hold 4 things and it suddenly is 3 variables, because now we're beginning to lose perspective and there's an increased certainty that the danger is here. Well, what looks like a loss of 25% is really a loss of 75%. Do the math. 3 times 1 times 2 is 6. So we move from having 24 options to 6. And that's the 75% loss of perspective. So along with the loss of perspective comes an increased sense of certainty. As things become less complex, we become more emotionally certain of what we have to do. So for example, you've just received an email that triggers a response, and you start typing your response immediately. Just before you hit send, a voice in the back of your head says, go for a walk, take a time out. Whew. When you come back from the walk, you're very thankful that you didn't send the email. Instead of the response that you had been so certain of in the moment after you received the email, you now have more perspective, and you've saved yourself a whole lot of grief. So a true story, I have an older sister that lives here in the state. She's up in the northern part of the state. And she and I have had a rocky relationship. I love her dearly. I don't always like her. So I had to suddenly establish the 24-hour rule for any response to her emails, because what I was doing was exactly what I've described. I suddenly lost perspective. I had an increased certainty that I was right and she was wrong, and I hammered out a snarky email back. I'd come back and open it up the next day and think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. So I established the 24-hour email rule, and I stick to it like glue. No matter what she might send me, I read it, I pause, I move on, I read it 24 hours later, and I can assure you that my relationship is less rocky than it would be simply because of taking that moment, because my amygdala is ready to hijack my brain. So you caught yourself, and I catch myself, sliding into a hijack and get yourself back to working 4 working thoughts and gain more perspective. So that's what I'm able to do. I suddenly go from this very limited options of what I'm typing wildly to taking time out, and then I'm back to working with a perspective, and I've got more opportunity. So if, however, we don't take that time out, then if the hijack continues, we further lose our ability to think complex thoughts by moving to 2 variables, and we begin to act on impulse with even more certainty. So think about if this should get to 1, we're acting without thought and moving straight to our default behavior. The state of reduced thinking capacity can last 18 minutes. And as I mentioned to you, if you keep up and sort of wrap around the axle, it can last much longer. Well, how many decisions do you think we make with less than the full set of 4 variables? So where's the skill development? Right here. The skill is recognizing the degree of hijacking in yourself and others, being able to prevent that loss of perspective, and ensuring others are working with their full thinking capacity. You might not have ever heard of the awfulizing mind, but I assure you, you might even have one. According to recent research, how many thoughts do you think the average human being has in a single day? Think about that just for a moment. 300, 900, 1,000. Well, hold on. 60,000. That's correct. 60,000 thoughts on average. And we know no such thing as average human beings, but just humor me and humor yourself for a moment. In a single day, 60,000 thoughts. Well, researchers have also been able to uncover the types of thoughts that people typically have when they begin to awfulize. So, what percentage of our thoughts are future related? Related to the past? Related to doubt? Related to issues about health and well-being? Think about that for just a moment. So, how many thoughts are really focused on the future? And we're talking about just in a day. So, how many thoughts do you have about the past? How many thoughts do you have about doubt? And probably for some of us, we worried more about our health over the past 18 months than before. Well, let's see. 40% about the future, 30% about the past, 12 are thoughts of doubt, and 10% are worries about our health. And again, this research was done pre-pandemic, so I would probably say that maybe we might have a few more thoughts about our health, more percentage. But look at that, do your math. 92% of all of our thoughts are not a true picture of reality. Only 8% of all our thoughts are a true picture of reality. But we often make decisions with utmost certainty. It's not the thoughts of the future or the past aren't important. They are. We certainly should be thinking about it. But think about it again. It's often that these thoughts don't reveal the truth about the opportunities in the now. Just because something was true then doesn't mean it's true now. And just because something might happen doesn't mean that it will. So the key learning on this piece is pretty simple. You don't have to believe everything you think. Because what triggers the amygdala? Believing. So much research around the fact that it's not the event that is the issue, it's your thoughts and beliefs about the event. So think about this. Pre-pandemic, I did a lot of traveling, so I'm at DIA, and I'm taking the little shuttle that goes from the airport to the parking lot. And I've had not the best trip, and I'm sort of feeling a little bit, well, tired. I might be feeling a little bit, deal didn't quite go well, so I'm feeling a little bit anxious. And I'm placed myself at what I consider to be the front of the line for the shuttle. Now there's no shuttle there, so I'm waiting. But I'm actually not at the front of the line because where I'm actually at are those big round trash cans. And I put my briefcase up on top and I'm really rifling through that. So in all reality, I'm probably 4 feet from what would be the front of the line. So I'm the only one there at the moment. And then a gentleman pops up and he stands in the real front of the line. Well, I have 2 choices. Remember, I had a lousy day, travel was icky, deal didn't go through. So now I'm beginning to get angry and I'm not being very emotionally intelligent because what I want to do is tell him to butt out. Because after all, I was first in line. I mean, couldn't he see that? Oh no, it's just like everything else that ever happens in my life. Gosh, I didn't get the deal. I got pushed aside. Here's another example of being pushed aside. I mean, you can imagine that I could get myself wrapped around the axle. And as I'm doing that, my amygdala is going danger, 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 danger. And so pouring that cortisol over to my thinking brain, and I am getting stupider and stupider and might even act out on this silly belief. But if I could step back and if I recognize that I wasn't the first in line, I might make a fun joke. I might say, oh, you beat me to it. Here I am still working. Should have probably put that briefcase down and come over and get in line with you, because how many seats are on a shuttle? About 15. So even if I'm the second person in line, I'm still going to get a seat. But do you begin to see how this can start playing tricks with you? That you can begin to think about, wow, what's going on in my head? Well, I hope that you'll engage in a little test with me, a little exercise, because one of the keys to mastering emotional intelligence is really to understand how we can explain setbacks to ourselves. So before we do that, let's do an activity. So we're going to solve anagrams. Well, what is an anagram? Many of you know. It's a word puzzle that consists of scrambled letters. When they're unscrambled, then they actually form a familiar word. So just take a moment and think, who loves anagrams? Who hates anagrams? Well, either way, would you be willing to give it your best for 60 seconds? Okay, so I'm going to show you 5 anagrams. You'll have 12 seconds to solve each one. So grab your paper, grab your pencil, and are you ready? Here we go. Here's the first one. Okay, the next one. Here's the third one. Here's the fourth one. And the last one. Okay, time's up. So before I reveal the answers, what was your thought process during this exercise? How did you do? So everybody get 5 out of 5? Maybe 4 out of 5? How about 3 out of 5? 2? 1? Well, okay. So if you didn't get all 5 right, what were you saying to yourself after the first attempt? And then what did you say to yourself after the second? And then when you saw the third word, and so on. So only you will know the answer, but let's be candid. Using a scale of 1, low, and 10, high, rate the degree to which you gave it your all at the start of the exercise compared to at the end of the exercise. Well, it's a good thing we're not in person, because quite frankly, the first 4 words, the first 4 anagrams aren't actual words. There's no way that you could make a word out of them. The last word is rabbit. So this was deliberate. I own it. This was a deliberate setback for you to experience. So if you didn't get the 5th anagram, is it because you quit? We make up intellectual excuses all the time. It was a setup. This is stupid. I always hated this kind of stuff. Why are we doing this? Who cares? Well, if you did quit, ask yourself if there are other things in work or life that you're quitting on because you don't believe in yourself, or there were too many setbacks. So what excuses do we hear or tell ourselves for not staying in the game through the setbacks? We need to be able to manage the power of the thinking mind and stick to it even when the situation gets tough. So if we're going to become skilled, more skilled at self-management, then I'm going to encourage you to ask yourself a few key questions in those intense moments or after a setback. So these questions can define the difference between success and failure. Did I give it my all? If it didn't work out, did I learn, change my game? Did I quit? So think back to that silly anagram exercise. How would you answer these questions? Well, these are great coaching questions, whether you're working with direct reports, peers, managers, or with customers. They are excellent questions to ask ourselves at the end of every day. Well, before we go into building EQ, let's make sure that we take a moment to take a look at the business case that was part of your handouts, because I might not have convinced all of you that this is an important thing to consider, but I hope some of these items in the business case will. So when you look at the second paragraph of your handout, it says Stanford University research of Fortune 500 companies showed that 90% of those who failed as leaders did so because they lacked the interpersonal skills that are a critical part of emotional intelligence. Then think about some of the other noteworthy findings. The first bullet, researchers estimate that success at work is 80 to 90% EQ and only 10 to 20% IQ. Think back to that wonderful list of qualities and characteristics that you drew up at the beginning of the session. Again, I don't recall seeing maybe one, maybe two technical skills. They were all emotional intelligence. When you think about the fact that, again, our IQ is set at age 16, but thankfully our EQ is not. We can continue to build on that. Third bullet says, unlike IQ, EQ can be learned and developed. Research shows that EQ can increase with age. At the very last of the bullets, it says how long employees stay at a company and how productive they are is largely determined by the relationship with their immediate supervisor. People with high EQ bosses are 4 times less likely to leave than those with low EQ bosses. So take a moment at your own time to look through that business list. If you haven't quite been convinced that it makes sense to think about how to build your own EQ. Well, we all have triggers and hot buttons. Actions or people that just set us off. So I'd like you to take a moment to reflect on what gets you wrapped around the axle. Jot down a couple of those triggers, and then if you would, join me again on menti.com, same space place, www.menti.com, and use the same code 2798-5601. This will be just open-ended questions, so you can just pop in, fill in the blank, so to speak. But let's see what it is that makes people just get a little bit beyond themselves. Need to move this on. So what are some of your hot buttons or triggers? Maybe it's people not doing what they say they'll do. Maybe it's disrespect. Maybe it's people who raise their voice. So again, we're at menti.com. Code is 2798-5601. Hope you'll play. And remember, it's anonymous, so we don't know who you are. Ooh, I'm right there with you when my expertise is questioned. That's a great one. Too many stimuli. Passive aggressive. These are great. I'm beginning to feel my blood pressure go up. Saying that they hear me but completely disregard my opinion and feedback. Yeah. Ooh, not listening. We'll give it a few more, another minute or so to add those. I appreciate those of you that shared. Liars. Ooh, conversation gets cut off. Interrupting. Lazy people. Lack of understanding. These are great. And as I said, I'm beginning to feel a little bit of high blood pressure coming my way. Thank you for sharing. People who come off as know-it-alls, yep, these are great. And my disappointment is I'm not clever enough to figure out how to be able to show the whole screen. Ooh, dishonesty, being lumped in a group instead of treated like an individual. Yes. So thank you for those. And again, I appreciate you sharing, because let's be candid. We've all got something that just gets our goat, makes us wish that things were different. So could those be hijacks though? Could those triggers actually not be real, but just how we think and feel about them? Not to negate anything that any of you wrote, but just thinking again about, do people actually send us into a hijack? And if they do, how can we avoid being hijacked? Because I'm not sure about you, I'm not a control freak, but at the same time, I sort of like to be in control of just exactly what's going on in the situation. So how can we build EQ? Well, after you first saw your own contributions to a situation, then the next step is building emotional connection. Emotional connection is to build a bridge between your view of understanding or a situation and someone else's view or understanding of the situation. So that building bridges strategy is an effective method to practice empathy and build emotional connections. So here's how it works. Imagine a bridge. In a typical interaction with another person, you would be on one side of the bridge. You're over here, you're understanding your view of the situation, their behavior. So the person you're interacting with would be on the other side, representing two different perspectives you both bring to the conversation, a potential understanding gap. That's the potential hijack zone. The challenge in understanding the other position is that we try to understand each other while we remain on our side of the bridge. Then we wonder, well, why the other person isn't able to grasp our perspective? What's wrong with them? So to be the most effective that we can be as a leader, we need to understand the other person's perspective. It's imperative. So you must walk across the bridge to join the other person on his or her side. Then you have a better chance of being able to view their perspective through their eyes. When we stay on our own side of our bridge, we tend to try to persuade with our compelling reasons. For instance, we're right. We have more experience. We have position and authority. Well, if you've tried this, you realize it has little to persuade the other person's emotional state. You actually have to build from that person's side of the gap, the bridge, one step at a time. So we want that other person to make the leap on their own volition. The solution needs to come from them. That leads to a greater degree of commitment and to making it work. So the result of crossing the bridge to the other side is that you might change your perspective. Well, however, in all fairness, if after understanding their perspective, your perspective still needs to be shared, then you're in a position to walk with the other person across the bridge to your side, helping that individual to gradually gain a better understanding of your perspective. A good leader starts on the left, and a great leader starts on the right. Let me say that again. A good leader starts on the left with your understanding, your view, but a great leader starts on the right side, the other person's perspective. Great leaders see it as an opportunity to bring someone to a broader view of the issue, to coach, to grow the other person, to get them to a new place of understanding. So how do we build bridges? Well, the first step is listening. We call it the 3 L's. The second step is the opportunity to learn. And the third step is looking for solutions. See how nicely that bridge gets built? But pay attention to, again, that potential hijack zone. That's where, if we instead just stay with our side of the bridge trying to walk across, that's when our thoughts and our beliefs can begin to wrap us around the axle. So again, we want to listen, which turns into the learning process, which then allows us the opportunity to look for solutions. Daniel Goleman says, if your emotional abilities aren't in hand, if you don't have self-awareness, if you are not able to manage your distressing emotions, if you can't have empathy and have effective relationships, then no matter how smart you are not going to get very far. Well, let's do a little bit of self-assessment. This is obviously done in privacy. So I'm going to ask you to pull out your handouts, and the second to the last piece allows you to actually answer the question, got EQ? Take a few moments to answer the questions below. Don't overthink your answers. Go with your first thought. And this isn't a test. This isn't a I gotcha. This is a wow. Look what I know. And look what I don't know. So again, I'm going to give you a few moments. You've got 14 statements that I'm going to encourage you to, again, take a moment to read the question and be candid with yourself. You're the only one that needs this information, and you're the only one that will have it. So check your box, yes or no. Give you a few minutes to do that. Oopsie. Just a few more minutes and then we'll begin again. So by now you figured out that what we hope for is a whole lot of check marks in the yes column, but we're all human and it's very possible that we had to say no. Maybe you were a little bit on the fence and you sort of had a check mark in the yes and no box. So take a moment now. It says, how did you do? Circle any of the items that you would like to work on. So take a moment if you answered no to any of those 14 statements or those questions. Is there something that you'd actually like to work on to build your EQ? And then another fun question to ask yourself, if you're in a leadership position, whether you're a official leader or you're an informal leader, in whatever capacity that you have in your life, whether it's professional, maybe you lead a sports group, maybe you lead a volunteer group, in addition to working in your counties. But how would others answer these questions about you? Because that's that other piece of the puzzle, is how aware you are, but at the same time, how do you project yourself? How do others see you? So take a moment contemplating that as well. We've covered a significant amount of information in a very short period of time. What I hope is that if you had questions about just exactly what was emotional intelligence, what's all this EQ business, that you got a better sense of the fact, and I'm going to slip back to several of my slides just so that we can all be looking at them together. So bear with me, apologize for this. But again, thinking about the 4 elements of emotional intelligence. Each one of these builds on one another. And the fact of the matter is that where do we start? So some of you are thinking, gosh, there are some places that I need to start to build my emotional intelligence. Well, it starts with us. It starts with our self-awareness. It starts with being aware of of our emotions. And we certainly want emotions. We want that opportunity to be an emotional person. And what I'd like to encourage you to be thinking about is, what is exactly your sense of self? Then is it an accurate self-assessment? And that's where we have the opportunity to have others actually think through, give that self-assessment, that opportunity for someone to else say, you know, CJ, boy, you wear your heart on your sleeve. I mean, your facial expressions, I know exactly what's going on. Well, that might be okay, but maybe I need to be a little bit more aware of that situation. So I want that accurate self-assessment. And then my self-management. Can I really identify those triggers? And can I think about, what will I do next time? How could I change that up? Well, this is the one thing that we know to be true. We can't change anyone else. Oh, we'd like to. I've known a lot of people I wanted to change, but I can't. Just not within I don't have that magic wand. So what can I do? Well, it comes down to self-management. I can change my reaction. Can't change the situation, but I can change my reaction. So think about individuals within your sphere of influence, those individuals that you come into contact with. Maybe some of those were part of your triggers. Maybe you've got an Aunt Ethel that anytime she can, she pokes a little bit. Maybe it's about your hair. Maybe it's about your weight. Maybe it's about what you do for a living. Aunt Ethel isn't changing anytime soon, but you can change the script. And you know why we don't change the script? Because it's so much easier. I don't even have to think about it. And Ethel says A, I say B. And Ethel says C, I say D. It's already like inside. I'm hardwired for it. It's automatic thoughts. I don't even have to pay attention. But oddly enough, even though I'm not paying attention, she gets me every time. So I have to change the script. I have to say, whoa, wait a minute. And I've got to change my lines. And then you know what Aunt Ethel does? She goes, whoa, whoa, that's not what you're supposed to say. You always say this. And I say, changing the script on you, Aunt Ethel. Let's move ahead. So that's a little bit of that self-management, that ability to have self-control, adapting to the situation, being optimistic, and then moving on up to social awareness, where I can actually embrace and show empathy. But remember, empathy is an invitation for the other person to share. And sometimes, well, quite frankly, we're not in the mood or we're not in the space. So how can I, again, be aware and be empathetic, manage myself? And then the relationship management. How can I really think about being an influencer? How can I develop others, even though I might not be in a leadership position, but if I am, certainly I want that. Teamwork and collaboration. I want to be a change catalyst. How can I manage conflict? So those are important pieces of the puzzle. I certainly want to encourage you, and I apologize, I should have invited questions all along. I get pretty passionate about this topic, so sometimes I think, oh, it's my turn. It's all about me. But please, if you do want to ask a specific question, we've got a little bit of time left, and Anna will check the chat for me if you've got some questions that you want to ask. I'm going to go ahead and move us to the last part of our piece. So again, bear with me as I quickly go through these to get to where I need to be. Give you a speed lesson in speed reading. Well, so what? Now what? We attend a workshop or we read a book and we think to ourselves, oh yeah, I've got to remember that. And then we end up with something on the shelf. So I'm going to ask you to give yourself a gift of time. We don't always do this, and I've arranged for some time here for you. I'd like you to take the last handout that you have that's titled, So What, Now What? And I'd like you to take a moment to think about, what were the main messages for you from today's session? Just jot yourself a little bit of a reminder, sort of a Cliff Notes. And then think about, how will I apply the material that I took today? And then, because we always need a benchmark, what are the results that you expect to see? And please, if you've got questions or comments, please put them in your chat box and Anna will translate for me. Give you a few more minutes to fill out your so what now what before we wrap for the afternoon. So at the beginning of our session, I suggested that what's in it for you? Well, the opportunity to discuss those 4 components of emotional intelligence, which we just did a quick review of. The opportunity to assess your own EQ, which we did near the end of our session. The opportunity to really define what an emotional hijack is and to recognize your triggers. And then find some ways to build that EQ. My hope is that spending the afternoon with me was valuable, and I trust that you have more knowledge about emotional EQ, and I hope a little bit of curiosity. There are myriad books on emotional intelligence. There are also some opportunities to take some, I'm not sure that they're all free, but I do believe there are some online assessments where you can get a good sense of just exactly where there might be an opportunity to enhance or where you are absolutely right where you should be. Remember again that emotional intelligence starts with you and quite frankly is pretty much all about you. So my hope is that when you take a look at that so what now what, you gave yourself an opportunity to think through, what might I do with this kind of information? And we do have a question, so I'm going to stop for just a moment. Can factors such as anxiety compound the emotional hijacking process? Absolutely. Thanks. That's a great question, Casey. So the question is, can it compound? Can it exacerbate or lengthen the hijack state? Yes. So when I said that it's possible that your amygdala could be on steroids, meaning it's just pumping out that cortisol over and over again, it's your ability to talk yourself off the ledge, meaning that the opportunity for you to say, whoa, wait a minute, is this real? So back to my example of being first in line, but not, what I needed to do was really stop myself and say, okay, maybe I wasn't first in line. I mean, how silly is this? And I'm still going to get a chance to be on that bus. But if I don't say that to myself, then I'm going to be thinking how unfair the world is. And once again, I had somebody who took my spot. And the more I think that way, the greater the hijack and the greater the length of that hijack state. So yes, Casey, absolutely. The question is, what are we doing for our self-care? How can we begin to work more with ourselves? You all are aware of this image, I'm sure, but one of the things that I always have to put in my head is that image of when you're on a plane pre-pandemic, or maybe you've traveled since then, of when the flight attendant pulls the oxygen mask and puts it directly on their face. And they say, this is not intuitive. What most people want to do is take that oxygen mask and put it on the person next to you. That's human nature. But we can't. We have to remember to put it on us first so that we can breathe in, so that we're then being able to help someone else. So that's the piece of this hijacking puzzle, is what are we doing for ourselves? How can we begin to allow ourselves to breathe, to think more clearly, and so forth. So thanks so much for that question. I hope that wrapped up the answer for you. Well, we are at quitting time, as we like to say, and I think you're going to get a few more minutes than you were thinking of. But I do want you to take care of yourself. I want you to be aware of those thoughts that may trigger a hijack, because what you want and what I want for you is success. So begin to pay attention to when it is that you begin to be anxious, or when it is that you begin to question, is this real? Am I really first in line? Should I step back? And that takes practice. But that's the beautiful thing about emotional intelligence. Remember, we've all got the smarts we've got since 16, but we have an opportunity to develop our emotional intelligence, and we have the opportunity to share what we learned today and with our individuals around us in our sphere of influence, because what we really want is a really emotionally healthy individual. So thank you so much for your time today. I hope you have a great conference and appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Giving you a few extra minutes so that maybe that'll begin that relaxation and self-care. Again, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all that you do.
CJ, thank you so much for your shared knowledge and your time. We at CFSC always appreciate everything that you do for us and helping us being able to take care of ourselves. So, and understanding ourselves, right?
Yeah, I hope this was a benefit, Anna. It seemed like a lot of information. I usually like to, show a little bit more of my humor. There's not a lot of humor with emotional intelligence. So I am anxious to receive the feedback. So thank you for being my spot on person. And sorry that I didn't think about encouraging them to ask questions. I'm so used to being on my own platform that I wasn't thinking about the fact that they couldn't or wouldn't. So appreciate you sending that message out.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you. Have a great day, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, CJ.
Bye.
Bye. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much on that day one of the CFSC conference. We're going to go ahead and take a break. Well, it's pretty much, we're scheduled till 4:30. If you have any questions, you can navigate through the platform. There are possible, I'm going to look to see if there is a evaluation form. If not, I'll send maybe a message, or we'll have Alyssa send out a message about the evaluation form. Otherwise, thank you everybody for your time and effort. And I'll see if our president, Alyssa, if she's around, would like to say anything. If not, we'll just take a break. So thank you so much, everybody.
Wow. Welcome back, everyone. What an amazing day. How about that Brad Montgomery and Anna this morning? And the message, what we do and who we are matters. Everyone is awesome. You are awesome. How about Elise and Larry and this year's state award winners? Amazing job. And congratulations again to this year's state award winners. To our child support professionals and partners, give yourselves a pat on the back. You make the difference. Thank you for the incredible stories shared and work being done in child support. To all of this year's retirees, congratulations and enjoy your next chapter. Your knowledge and service are greatly appreciated, and you all will be missed so much. Great job, Entertainment Committee, and thank you again, SMI, for the continued partnership and sponsoring our conference door prizes. To all of our sponsors, we are so grateful and glad to have each of you with us for conference. Attendees, don't forget, sponsors are available in our sponsor hall and breaks. Stop by, say hi, and connect. If you are participating in our gamification challenge, which we strongly encourage you do, please make sure you are visiting our gamification page and completing those challenges and submitting your passcodes throughout conference, and see who's leading who on our leaderboard. Johanna from Larimer County, we see you. Hint, don't forget to check out that social wall either. Great job to those board members, to our board members who have worked on making this such a fun and interactive challenge for everyone. Jerry, Andrea, and Caruso Family Charities, using Larry's comment this morning, what a great charity and wonderful work they do. There is still time to make a difference. Head over to our conference homepage, click on our charity logo, and donate. If you do, make sure to include CFSC, your name and county, in the donation comments. Wonderful job, Donations Committee, and those who submitted charity nominations, for connecting us with this year's charity of choice. Thank you, thank you, thank you to today's session speakers and moderators. Amazing job, everyone. Attendees, please make sure you are completing that session feedback located at the bottom of each session page. If you haven't already done so, take a few minutes, go back to any sessions you finished today, or just have that information tomorrow. Also, make sure you're visiting our activity posts to comment and share. What did you learn today to add to your toolbox or to take away from today's sessions? Whew. I don't know about you, but I'm going to go and take a few minutes and process this amazing day. But before I do, I want to give you a special and huge thank you. I want to give a special and huge thank you to this year's board for all of their hard work, dedication, and commitment this year. I could not have done it without you. We could not keep doing it without all of you. And all of this excitement today, enjoy knowing we are surrounded here in this virtual space by each other. Maybe not physically, but in person. It's a start, right? I want to leave you all with the following message. In a universe where we cannot control everything happening around us, to us, and within us at times, we are all connected. It is never about me or you, it's about us. We are all in this together, helping one another invent, evolve, and do our very best. The more we do this, the more you feel good because they feel good, and they are you, and you are them. Think about that. Let's continue growing together, supporting each other, encouraging each other, and staying connected with each other. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. See you back tomorrow for day 2.